بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وينزل عليكم من السماء ماء ليطهركم به ويذهب عنكم رجز الشيطان وليربط على قلوبكم ويثبت به الأقدام.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وآل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Dear brothers and sisters, in this session I am going to explain the rules of the obligatory ghusl or the obligatory bath. There are 7 obligatory ghusl. The first one is ghusl for janaba. The second is ghusl for haiz or bath for haiz. Haiz is of course the monthly menstrual blood. And the third one is ghusl for nifas. Nifas means the child birth bleeding or the bleeding which occurs after a woman gives birth to a child. The fourth is ghusl for istihaza. Of course, is the irregular blood which a woman discharges sometimes, of course, even when a woman is young or when a woman is old, she might discharge irregular blood. So after getting purified of the blood, she must perform ghusl. And of course, ghusl of istihaza is the 4th obligatory bath. The 5th obligatory bath is the bath or the ghusl for touching a dead body. If you touch a dead body when it's cold or when it has turned cold, then it's necessary to perform ghusl after you touch the dead body. And the 6th, of course, obligatory bath is the ghusl for a dead body. When someone dies, it is obligatory on every Muslim to give the dead body a bath or to wash the dead body, a ritual bathing. That is obligatory, irrespective of whether that dead body belongs to a Muslim man or to a Muslim woman or to a child or to an elderly man or woman. It is necessary to wash the dead body. And it's obligatory on all Muslims to do or to fulfill this obligation. Of course, when an individual does fulfill and when there is someone who gives the obligatory bath or who washes the dead body, then others are relieved of the obligation. Others are no longer under the obligation to take action. The 7th obligatory ghusl is the ghusl which a person which becomes obligatory as a result of a nadhr or as a result of a vow. For example, a person vows that he will do a certain act after performing ghusl, or he vows that he will perform ghusl on a certain day or with a certain condition, and so on and so forth. Every kind of vow that we make, or what is called as nadhr in the Arabic terminology or in the legal terminology, nadhr, then of course that vow has to be fulfilled and the ghusl should be done. But in jurisprudential terminology, of course, when we talk about nadr has a special formula, it has certain conditions which, if fulfilled and which, if met, then it becomes obligatory on the individual who vows to do a certain act to carry out that act and to take action. Now, if a person vows to perform a certain ghusl, then of course it is necessary to fulfill that ghusl, to fulfill that vow, and to carry out that task, to take action about it. Now, dear brothers and sisters, in the previous session, I just pointed out a few rulings or a few rules regarding ghusl, and I focused for a minute or two on the rules regarding ghusl janabah. It is a very important issue, and there are many people who still don't know how to perform ghusl, and there are many people who even do not know that ghusl janabah is obligatory. Because I have gone through the websites and through questions sent to the offices of some grand religious authorities, there are people, especially the adults and the adolescents, who ask questions about ghusl, telling their maraji or their mujtahid that he even did not know that ghusl janabah was obligatory. He performed prayers, he observed fast, not knowing that he had to perform ghusl, and he had to purify himself. Okay, these are questions. And of course, we have to clarify these issues, and we have to elaborate on these as much as we can. Now, when it comes to the rules of janabah, as I said, janabah takes place in two ways. First of all, it is the sexual intercourse. There's no doubt about the sexual intercourse. When a person has sexual intercourse, it is necessary for him or her to perform ghusl janabah. Of course, by sexual intercourse means the penetration of the sexual organ. And of course, if a man has penetrated his sexual organ to the point of circumcision, then ghusl is obligatory. I should tell you that full penetration of the organ is not necessary. If a man penetrates or inserts his sexual organ to the point of circumcision, then ghusl becomes obligatory. Both the woman and the man should perform ghusl janabah. If you, for example, have some intimate relationship with your wife, and you doubt whether actually the penetration took place or not, or whether the sexual organ was inserted to the point of circumcision or not, then in this case you are not supposed to perform ghusl janabah. You are relieved of obligation, and there is nothing to do. Now, this is the ruling regarding ghusl janabah and the ruling regarding sexual intercourse. Of course, there are other ways of entering the state of janabah also. And that is if a man ejaculates. If men, of course, sometimes they masturbate and they commit this haram act, and sometimes, of course, they have wet dreams, and sometimes the semen comes out, the ejaculation takes place by itself. So there are occasions when a man has not had sexual intercourse, but of course he is still under the obligation to perform ghusl janabah.
يا محول الحول والأحوال حول حالنا حول حالنا يا أحسن الحال.
Now, if if he sees semen coming out of his sexual organ, then it is necessary for him to perform ghusl janaba. Now, if semen comes, it does not make any difference whether the semen comes in a large quantity or a small quantity, whether it comes with lust or without lust. If it is indeed semen, then ghusl becomes obligatory, or the bath becomes obligatory. When one, of course, when you cannot ascertain whether the fluid which was emitted is semen or urine, or maybe it is precum, then of course the ground religious authorities have explained. They have given a general criterion, a general principle by which you can, of course, ascertain the type of fluid that has come, and of course you can even ascertain your obligation. You can determine what you can decide about whether you should do ghusl or not. Of course, the scholars, the religious authorities have said that if semen is thrown out with lust, if the body is slackened, then that signifies, that is an indication of the fluid being semen. If the fluid is thrown out with lust, this is one condition. And the other one is, if the body is slackened, this is another sign and another condition. Now, if these two conditions are there, and if you know that these two conditions are with you, then of course that is a sign of the semen, of the fluid being semen. And of course, if none of these two conditions are there, and if you just feel that there is some liquid or some fluid coming out, then not every liquid, not every fluid is semen. Now, I give you examples. There are people who are aroused sexually when they go out in public, when they see women, or when they look at pictures. So they are sexually aroused. They get sexually excited as a result of this sexual excitation or excitement. Then, of course, there is some liquid on his organ. Of course, that is called precum, and that is not najis, that is not impure. You are not supposed to perform ghusl. There are people, of course, who ask questions about when they play with their wives, or when they have a foreplay. And of course, during foreplay, of course, a man does feel some kind of liquid coming out, and it is felt by him. That liquid is also not impure. That does not make ghusl obligatory. And if does not actually have sex, or if he does not ejaculate semen, then it is not necessary for him to perform ghusl. Now, of course, there are some women also who ask similar questions. When does, this is a question, when does a woman enter the state of janaba, when she has not had sexual intercourse? Of course, does a woman actually ejaculate or not? Or does she reach the pinnacle of sexual pleasure without sexual intercourse? And what are the signs, what are the indications by which we can understand, or by which a woman can understand that she has entered the state of janaba? The ground religious authorities have said that if a woman reaches orgasm means the climax, or the pinnacle of sexual pleasure, the ultimate point of sexual pleasure. And of course, meanwhile, she discharges some liquid, some fluid, and there is secretion on her body, she feels that she has become wet after, of course, or during orgasm, then that liquid is impure, and of course the emission is impure, and that emission is a sign of janaba. So it is necessary to take notice of two things. One is orgasm. Orgasm is necessary. If a woman discharges fluid without orgasm, just sometimes, of course, some women do discharge fluid without actually fancying, without thinking about men, about sex and such things. Of course, they have emissions, they feel some kind of discharge. Of course, that discharge is not considered to be impure, and the woman is not under the obligation to perform ghusl janaba. But if she starts fancying, if she starts thinking about men, or maybe watching something, or playing with her husband, and if she reaches the climax and then she discharges fluid, or she has emission, and then this is a state of janaba, and she must perform ghusl janaba. Now, dear brothers and sisters, of course, when a person enters the state of janaba, and when he ejaculates, or when he has had sexual intercourse, he must do istibra, means that he has to go to the toilet and he has to urinate. And of course, urinating is the only way through which a person can make sure that there is no semen left in the urinary passage. So in order to make sure that there is no semen, then he has to go and urinate, and that is the only way he can purify himself of semen only. And if after urinating he feels some kind of liquid coming out, then of course that liquid is not considered to be semen, and of course he will not be under the obligation to perform ghusl janaba. Dear brothers and sisters, when a woman or a man enters the state of janaba, there are some certain acts that he has to, or she has to, take notice of. And that is, he cannot do certain acts. He cannot, for example, approach certain things when he is in the state of janaba. There are 5 things, of course, that are haram for a person in the state of janaba. What are those 5 things? First of all, to touch with any part of one's body the script of the Holy Quran.
ناجيتك يا رحمن ودعوتك يا ديان يا خالق الإنسان الله 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 يا خالق الإنسان الله الله الله.
The names of Almighty Allah, of the Holy Prophet and the Imams and Lady Fatima salamullahi alayha. It is haram to touch with your fingers or with any part of your body these names and the scripts of the Holy Quran. And the second thing is that it is haram for a woman and a man to enter Masjid al-Haram and Masjid al-Nabi. Entering these 2 mosques is haram, even though you might be passing from one gate and going out from another gate, then that is, even in that case, it is haram. And of course, the third thing which is haram is to stay or to halt in any other masjid, in any other masjid. It could be your local masjid, it could be any masjid that is known to be masjid, not in Imam Bargah, of course. And Imam Bargah is not a masjid, of course. It is a Hussainiya. In Urdu, they call it Imam Bargah, and in Persian, they call it Hussainiya. And in other languages, they may have other words. But a masjid is a mosque for which the formula of the mosque has been recited. It has been considered formally as a mosque. In that case, it is haram to stay or to halt in that mosque. And of course, the fourth haram action or thing for a person in the state of janaba is to enter a mosque with an intention of lifting away something or placing something in that mosque. It is haram to place in the mosque something. If you are in the state of janaba, do not take up, do not place anything in the mosque, and it is haram for you to do that. And of course, the fifth haram action is to recite those verses which contain the obligatory sajda. I think I have mentioned this also, that when a person is in the state of janaba, or when a woman is in the state of impurity, she might be in the state of hayd, she might be in the state of nifas, or she might be in the state of impurity, any impurity. In that case, insofar as she is in the state of impurity, she cannot recite the 4 verses that contain obligatory sajda. Of course, some scholars have said that you cannot even recite the whole surah, the whole chapter in which there is an obligatory sajda. But some other scholars, like Grand Ayatollah Sistani, says that it is haram to recite only those verses which contain obligatory sajda. Now, what are those obligatory verses and what are those chapters in which there is an obligatory sajda? Now remember, if you have a pen, just write it down, because you might forget and you might not even be able to memorize. So remember, when you are in the state of janaba, or when a woman is in the state of hayd or in the state of nifas, read Surah Alif Lam Mim As-Sajda, and that is Surah 32 verse 15. Surah 32, which begins with Surah Alif Lam Mim, and then this surah is Surah 32. What is the verse? Verse is number 15, number 1. This surah, and then the next surah, which is the second surah, is Surah Hamim Sajda, which is the Surah 41, and the verse is 38. The verse is 38. Surah 41, verse 38. And the third surah, of course, is Surah An-Najm. Surah An-Najm. Now, what is the number of the surah? The number of surah is 53. And what is the number of the verse? The number of the verse is 62. Do not recite the whole surah or maybe the verse depending on the fatwa of the mujtahid whom you are following. Now, as a measure of precaution, I tell you, if you want to exercise precaution, do not recite the whole surah, because precaution requires not to recite the whole surah. But if you are not going to exercise precaution, you should not recite only that verse which contains the sajda. Now, it depends on who you follow and which marja you are following. The fourth obligatory sajda is Surah Al-Alaq. What is the number of the surah? The number of the surah is 96. And what's the number of the verse? The number of the verse is 19. So do not recite either the whole verse, the whole surah, or the verse which contains obligatory sajda. And of course, some people think that a person in the state of janaba should not even recite the Quran. Should not recite the Quran, he should not recite dua, and of course he should not do many other acts. No, of course he can recite the Quran, he can recite du'as, he can recite zikr, and so many things. He can mention God's names, and there is no objection, no problem in doing that. But the thing is that it is makruh. It is makruh for a person in the state of janaba and for a woman in the state of hayd and nifas to recite more than 7 verses from the Holy Quran. If a person recites more than 7 verses from the Holy Quran, it does not mean gain any sawab. He will gain the sawab, he will earn the sawab, but he will earn less sawab. He will earn less reward. Now, dear brothers and sisters, these are some of the rules regarding ghusl. The ghusl, of course, as I said, we have different kinds of ghusl. And of course, in this session, I just gave the general rules and general explanations regarding ghusl. And God forbid, if a man has sexual intercourse with an animal, of course, he must perform ghusl janaba also. Even if he did not ejaculate, even if he did not have reached an orgasm, then it is necessary for him to perform ghusl janaba. Ghusl janaba is obligatory for the person who God forbid has had sexual intercourse, or who has penetrated his sexual organ, and of course he has had sex with the animal. Ghusl is obligatory even if he did not ejaculate, and that is a very, very great sin for a man doing that. Now, even if he did not discharge fluid, he must do the ghusl, and ghusl in any case is sufficient for wudu. It is not necessary to perform wudu after doing ghusl. Ghusl, whether it is obligatory or recommended according to some scholars, of course, according to some scholars, it is sufficient for wudu, and it's not necessary to perform wudu. Wudu is not necessary. Wudu is not legal even for the person who has performed ghusl. Inshallah, I will explain the remaining rules regarding ghusl in the next session to come. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم انفعنا بالعلم وزينا بالحلم وجملنا بالعافية وكرمنا بالتقوى إن وليي الله الذي نزل الكتاب وهو يتولى الصالحين